On December 31st, 1999, Russian President Boris Yeltsin unexpectedly resigned. He named a former KGB agent, Vladimir Putin, as acting president of the Russian Federation. When the March 2000 election came around, Putin was elected as the incumbent, and he was re-elected in 2004. The Russian Federation didn't allow a president to serve for more than 2 consecutive terms. So in 2008, the incoming president, Dmitry Medvedev, named Putin to be prime minister. Medvedev served for only 1 term, and then instead of running for re-election, he announced that he and Putin would swap places. Kind of unprecedented, so that Putin would become president again. And Putin was later re-elected under suspicious circumstances, as seemingly is always the case with him. Protesters and politicians opposed to Putin have a nasty habit of getting arrested or gunned down or poisoned with radioactive polonium or occasionally flying out of high windows. Thus, Putin was president for 2 terms, then prime minister for 1 term, then president again for 2 more terms, and then, while preparing to become prime minister again, to remain in command always, Putin changed the Russian constitution all by himself in order to give more power to the prime minister, since he was about to be prime minister again. But then he realized he didn't really have to go through all of that again. Instead, he simply amended the constitution, allowing him to be president perpetually. Then he appointed himself for a 3rd consecutive term, his 5th one so far, with every election being allegedly rigged. This is the man who advises Donald Trump in how to run a national government. So this is something like what we could expect Trump to do too. Remember that Trump said that he should be allowed to change parts of the Constitution, and he said many times that he should have a 3rd term. And when we saw Trump swear an oath to defend the U.S. Constitution as president, we note that he did not put his hand on the Bible, which is probably the most Christian thing that Trump has ever done, not having his hand on the Bible while lying through his teeth, because he does not support the Constitution at all. Several of Trump's associates and supporters have even said that they don't want a government of, by, and for we the people. They want a monarchy with Donald Trump as king. Thus, between his criminal corruption, his support of corporatocracy, and his malignant narcissistic megalomania, Trump is the embodiment of everything the Founding Fathers warned us about and tried to prevent. And the majority of Republicans in Congress are enabling him to the destruction of our economy, ecology, our currency, our national morality and security, our place of prominence in the world stage, and every admirable thing the United States used to represent. Now ruined, our reputation permanently soiled. Let's read through the list of rights enshrined in the Constitution and see how the Trump cult have tried and still are trying to overturn, undermine, or at least manipulate most of it. The First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. This is the very first clause in the very First Amendment, because the freedom to think or believe whatever makes sense to us is so important that we should not be required to revere a false belief nor pretend to believe what we really don't, like they have done in so many other countries. But Trump has already contradicted both of these clauses. For one thing, he has many times parroted conservative views on establishing Christianity as the state religion, and each of Trump's published plans promised to infuse Christian nationalism into the government. The ultimate goal of Trump's policy, known as Project 2025, is to replace our secular democratic constitutional republic with an authoritarian theocratic regime, which is exactly what the American Revolutionary War was fought to save us from and get us out of. Religious right Republicans are always trying to get the 10 Commandments into our classrooms, expressly to create the illusion that America was founded as a Christian country, that our government was based on a covenant between God and Moses, and it doesn't matter to these people when expert historians provide proof that none of that is true. Christian, conservative, religious right Republicans have vowed to teach it anyway, even when they know it's not true, and despite the fact that all of that is in violation of the Establishment Clause. Texas has just passed a bill to post the 10 Commandments in every public school. Oklahoma and Louisiana are also determined to teach the Bible as history in their public schools, in a deliberate attempt to mislead and deceive sequestered students regardless of their rights or the preference of their parents. I think they think that if they can control what students believe, then they'll control how they'll vote. If Catholic Justice Amy Coney Barrett had not recused herself, then we would have already had state-funded religious schools nationwide, but not Muslim schools, because part of Trump's policy is to establish Christianity and prohibit the free exercise of other faiths. His repeated calls to ban Muslim immigrants is a violation of the Free Exercise Clause, as is his recent call to seek out and crush what he calls anti-Christian bias, which also means oppressing those who reject faith as well. There goes our religious freedom. Not just mine, yours too. However, Christian nationalists have told me a few times that the Constitution only grants religious freedom to Christians, that religious freedom only means that you have the right to worship Jesus according to your denomination's tradition. So as long as you're a true Christian. But if you're anything other than a Christian, then you're only a second-class citizen, and then you only have the right to shut up before you get shut down. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. While right-wingers often crow that they're all about free speech, they don't seem to know what that means. They seem to think that free speech means that they should be provided with a venue and an audience that can be forced to hear whatever nonsense or hate speech or other misleading propaganda they want to spread. No. Free speech means that you can express controversial opinions and even criticize the government without being arrested for it, without retaliation from those in power, even when the powerful are the ones being criticized. One of the symbols of free speech is that you can burn an American flag in the public square and not be arrested for that. But Trump wants to jail anyone who burns the flag. And he said that he should be able to use the military to handle what he called the enemy from within, whom he referred to as the immigrants he constantly dehumanizes, as well as what he called the radical left lunatics, which apparently means anyone who disagrees with him, since most of the people that he calls radical leftists are actually moderates, neither leftists nor in any way radical. I should add that at this moment, the Trump administration is being sued by NPR on the grounds that Trump defunding National Public Radio is a violation of their free speech. And then Trump demanded detailed information about thousands of Harvard students wanting to know what they think and what they say, information that the government would then use against those students. Harvard, of course, deems that another violation of the freedom of speech. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of the press. To quote the ACLU, Trump has made it very clear that he doesn't stand for the freedom of press. As a presidential candidate, he told supporters that he would open up our libel laws to sue journalists. "We're going to have people sue you like you've never been sued before," he promised. Trump also blacklisted reporters and entire news outlets from campaign events, referred to journalists as scum and slime, and mocked a reporter for having a disability. He vowed to sue women who reported sexual harassment or assault, after dozens of women had already accused him of sexual assault since the 1970s, and he threatened to sue a Hispanic journalist for calling out his bigoted remarks. "I would never kill them, but I do hate them," he said of reporters, "and some of them are such lying, disgusting people." Now, in his second term, Trump has in fact sued multiple agencies of news media threatening our freedom of the press. To quote the United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights, Trump's attacks are strategic, designed to undermine confidence in reporting and raise doubts about verifiable facts. The president has labeled the media as being an enemy of the American people, very dishonest, or fake news, and he's accused the press of distorting democracy or spreading conspiracy theories or blind hatred. These attacks run counter to the country's obligations to respect press freedom and international human rights law. To quote Harvard Kennedy School, President Donald Trump has accused the press of being an enemy of the American people. Attacks on the media have been a hallmark of Trump's presidential campaign, but this charge marked a dramatic turning point. Language like this ventured into dangerous territory. 20th century dictators, notably Stalin, Hitler, and Mao, had all denounced their critics, especially the press, as enemies of the people. Their goal was to delegitimize the work of the press as fake news and create confusion in the public mind about what's real and what isn't, what can be trusted and what can't be. All of this implies that we are likely to see our free press replaced by state-controlled news channels like Fox News or One America News, but where Trump's team decides what the news will or will not say, just like they have in Russia. Not actual journalism, just pure propaganda. Congress shall make no law abridging the right of the people peaceably to assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances. One of the very first things Trump did as president when he was elected the first time, apart from repealing like 100 environmental protections and such so that industries can now legally pollute public waterways, was that Trump resumed construction on a dangerous pipeline project against the recommendation of the Army Corps of Engineers and despite sustained objections from the Sioux Nation. And this, of course, resulted in multiple oil spills, polluting the only available water supply in the area with tens of thousands of gallons of crude on multiple occasions. And everybody knew that was going to happen. Trump also sent in local law enforcement to clear out the protesters. And then he tried to expand an existing law that would have made it illegal to protest construction projects. Remember, this is the same guy who 4 or 5 years ago ordered the police to tear gas a crowd who were protesting police brutality. Now, just as I predicted months ago, Trump wants to use the military to shut down every protest, especially now that the Supreme Court has made themselves redundant by giving Trump unchecked power to commit crimes. Some parts of Project 2025 and also the new Big Beautiful Bill allow Trump to do exactly what he wants. He might even be able to change the U.S. Constitution, just like Putin changed the Russian one, to give himself unrestrained perpetual power as the first American dictator. So your right to peaceably assemble to protest the government will end up looking like the massacre at Tiananmen Square. Don't forget that the extreme court has already allowed Trump to order the assassination of his political rivals. So now it really is almost the way that Nixon once said it was.
Well, when the president does it, that means that it is not illegal.
By definition.
Exactly.
We've just covered the First Amendment. What about all the rest of them? The Second Amendment says, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Trump has learned not to mess with this one. He tried banning bump stocks and raising the minimum age to buy what are often called assault rifles to the age of 21, but Trump supporters do not like common sense gun laws because they're not known for common sense. What is the reason given for why we have the right to bear arms? Because a well-regulated militia is necessary for the security of the state. A militia being a military force that is raised from a civil population to supplement the army in case of an emergency. Now, some homosexuals will argue that the Second Amendment doesn't mean what it says, but it is indisputably obvious that is what it means. The U.S. did not have a standing army in 1787 when the Constitution was written. Now we have the most over-bloated military in world history. We no longer need a militia, and randomly assorted collections of gun nuts would not be well regulated anyway. While the reason we have the right to bear arms definitely was originally so that we could be called upon to fight for our government, we maintain that right now for the opposite reason, so that perhaps we could fight against our government if need be. And I support that, let's be clear. But that leads to a psychological strategy being employed against the common people by the actual enemies from within, those currently in charge. When the powers that be celebrate your right to bear arms, it leads you to a false sense of security. Because if everyone has their guns, any kind of gun they want, as many kinds of guns as they want, and they feel safe, even in a police state, where mere cops are inexplicably equipped with technology designed for war, and where Trump now says he wants to use the military as the state police. You feel safe in your fortified home, but if you were perceived as being any sort of a threat to a corrupt authoritarian government, then you'll be surveilled by internet spies, tracked by invisible drones, and finally seized in traffic or maybe in a restaurant by an anonymous mob of hooded thugs carrying AR-15s. Only then will you realize that it is all your other rights on either side of the Second Amendment that could have protected you, where your guns alone cannot do you any good. The Third Amendment says that no soldier shall in time of peace be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. This is another one that was only an issue back in the days of the American Revolution. British soldiers would often take over people's homes because back in the 18th century there was as yet no hotels or other buildings to use as shelter. Now there are plenty, and vehicles too, so this isn't likely to be an issue anymore. However, the Fourth Amendment says the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Quoting the ACLU, when the government wants to obtain Americans' private information, like where they live, what doctor's office they visited, and who they are dating, the Fourth Amendment requires that they go to a court and obtain a warrant. But for years now, federal agencies, including the Internal Revenue Service and the Department of Defense, have been buying their way around this requirement by purchasing Americans' sensitive information from data brokers. But it gets worse than that. Based on Trump's inappropriate application of the Alien Enemies Act, his Attorney General Pam Bondi recently issued a memo granting authority for police to enter a suspected alien enemy's residence without a warrant, if they judge it to be impractical or maybe inconvenient to wait until they get one first. This, despite Trump's complaints that when federal agents searched his home and found that he had been deliberately hiding numerous boxes of stolen classified documents, some of which he was showing off to unauthorized party guests and some of which he digitally uploaded to unknown recipients. This while he was also in illegal secret communication with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Trump complained that the warrant used on him was too broad, because it allowed that if stolen classified documents were found in one box, then they could seize all of the other similar boxes stacked with it, as if Trump would only be hiding sensitive national secrets in one of all of those identical boxes hidden in his toilet. Pam Bondi's memo told law enforcement that immigrants deemed alien enemies are not entitled to a hearing, appeal, or judicial review. That is a lie. And it takes us to the Fifth Amendment, which says, no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment of indictment or of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia, when in actual service or in time of war or public danger. Nor shall any person be subject to the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. Again, there are multiple provisions here, but notice where it says that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. It does not say that no citizen or that no legal resident shall be deprived. No, it says that no person. That means if you're on U.S. soil, regardless whether you're here legally or not, whatever your conditions are, then you are under American jurisdiction and are entitled to due process under the Fifth Amendment. Trump is deliberately ignoring this and the courts by illegally detaining and deporting whoever he decides is a bad guy, even when there is insufficient evidence to make that call, and there has been no ruling on that from any court trial. Trump is sending prisoners to overseas prisons on life sentences without due process on the excuse that it would take too long to try all those people. And not only is that not a legally valid excuse, it is also immoral, because Trump knows that at least some of these people are innocent and would not be convicted if they did get a trial. There is also a good bit of hypocrisy here, because look at the clause that no person shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself. Trump bashed that part of the Fifth Amendment many times, as if pleading the Fifth was tantamount to an admission of guilt.
Taking the Fifth Amendment, like you see on the mob, right? You see the mob takes the Fifth. If you're innocent, why are you taking the Fifth Amendment?
Yet, when Trump was deposed on yet another of several charges of fraud, he himself pleaded the Fifth more than 400 times.
Anyone in my position not taking the Fifth Amendment would be a fool, an absolute fool.
Yeah, when you're a criminal, yeah. So, the Sixth Amendment says, among other things, that in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial. What Trump usually does here deprives himself of a speedy trial with endless appeals and delays, hoping to bog the system down or run out the clock until it doesn't matter anymore, like when he gains presidential immunity or when his opponents can no longer afford to retain lawyers waiting so long. But in March of this year, Donald Trump signed an executive order directing government agencies to suspend the security clearance of attorney Peter Koski and all other attorneys at his law firm. When he signed this order, Trump said that he wanted the moment to be known as the deranged Jack Smith signing, because his goal, apparently, was that they offered to work for Jack Smith in cases pertaining to Trump's theft of classified documents. But without a security clearance, there's no way they could even view the evidence in such a case. Other law firms won't either, recognizing how the empowered President Trump bragged that his retaliations would be 10 times harsher than whatever threat he perceives from anyone else. This is a definite abuse of power and certainly an abuse of the Sixth Amendment. The Seventh Amendment says that in suits of common law, where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, the right of trial by jury shall be preserved, and no fact tried by a jury shall be otherwise re-examined in any court in the United States than according to the rules of the common law. In February of 2017, Donald Trump proposed a tort reform that even the conservative Washington Times deemed unconstitutional because it would have undermined the Seventh Amendment by denying Americans the right to sue. Then the Eighth Amendment says excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. And during his first term, the Trump administration carried out 13 federal executions, more than any president in a century, more than the previous 10 administrations combined, including one against the wishes of the victims' families from a state that had already abolished the death penalty years ago. And now in his second term, Trump has expanded capital punishment with an order to pursue federal jurisdiction and seek the death penalty regardless of other factors, and for a wider range of crimes. But the previous president, Joe Biden, was trying to end the death penalty, and he commuted the sentences of 37 out of 40 inmates on federal death row into sentences of life without parole. However, Trump is excessively cruel, vindictive, and vengeful. While he could not legally have those 37 prisoners killed, he did order that they be imprisoned in conditions consistent with the monstrosity of their crimes. In other words, he wants to make their living conditions worse. A clinical professor of law at Yale said that the punishment is being incarcerated. The punishment is not the condition of confinement. That's not legal. The executive director of the Death Penalty Information Center said that the Eighth Amendment prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. There are limitations, both under the Constitution and international standards, that prohibit keeping people in torturous conditions. The Ninth Amendment reads, "The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people." Vague though this may seem, it is meant to protect as yet unidentified rights to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. The right to privacy has been famously interpreted as being covered here, along with your gender identity, sexual orientation, religious position, and so on. And one of the ways that Trump has violated this one is with his many attacks on those who are genderqueer by, among other things, his recent order of banning trans people from military service. The 10th Amendment says that the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited to it by the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to their people. Trump is always pretending as if his power is absolute, that it has to be. He says that there's an Article 2 in the Constitution that allows him to do whatever he wants, but no, it doesn't. This part of the Constitution makes clear that his power was always meant to be limited. The 11th Amendment says the judicial power of the United States shall not be construed to extend to any suit in law or equity commenced or prosecuted against one of the United States by citizens of another state, or by citizens or subjects of any foreign state. Now, some Republican politicians have argued that they should be able to impose criminal penalties if, for example, a citizen of one state where abortion is illegal gets an abortion in another state where it is legal. The 11th Amendment prevents that. So Texas MAGA Republican Attorney General Ken Paxton filed a lawsuit against a doctor in New York who prescribed and provided abortion-inducing pills to a woman in Texas. The 12th Amendment revises the old original way elections were run and requires the current vice president to certify the election results, even if that means Mike Pence has to certify that he is being replaced by Kamala Harris. I'm sure you can see why Trump and MAGA Republicans would have a problem with that after Mike Pence refused to overturn the election of Joe Biden during Trump's insurrection and attempted coup d'etat on January 6, 2021. It amazes me and confuses me how Trump was not arrested on that day, nor in the weeks to follow, nor even after January 6 hearings confirmed his guilt and involvement. I guess there just is no justice. The 13th Amendment abolishes slavery, but Assemblyman Jim Wheeler said that he would bow to whatever his constituents wanted, even if that meant reinstating slavery. But the voters don't get to overturn the Constitution. There are a lot of white supremacists in the Republican Party these days. 100 years ago, all the Ku Klux Klansmen were in the Democratic Party, but they're all Republicans now. And so are the Nazis and every other racist group I can think of. Many of them would love to bring back slavery, but the politicians among them usually know better than to say something like that publicly and on record. But not Trump-loving MAGA Republican North Carolina Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson. He openly advocated for reinstating slavery, adding that slavery is not bad. Some people need to be slaves. I would certainly buy a few. As if that wasn't confusing enough, he also praised Hitler and described himself as a black Nazi. The 14th Amendment has two sections that Trump is against here. Section 1 says, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Trump is determined to end birthright citizenship. He's already taken it to 3 courts and been blocked all 3 times. Now he's taken it to the Supreme Court, whom he effectively owns. Section 3 says that no person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States or as a member of any state legislature or as an executive or judicial officer of any state, to support the Constitution of the United States shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or have given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. Trump engaged in insurrection. While the courts initially said that any state could enforce constitutional law, in this instance they made an exception, saying that Congress first has to pass legislation declaring that a person engaged in insurrection. Even though this very section of the Constitution says the very opposite, that such a person is barred from election unless, by a vote of 2/3 from each house, removes such disability. This is why I think the United States is now one of the most corrupted nations on earth, worse than we've ever been. Because government officials will make special rules for their cult leader that no one else has to follow, and he can get away with more illegal, unethical, immoral, and inappropriate actions than anyone else ever even imagined doing. The 15th Amendment says the right of the citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. But conservative Christian religious right Republicans are notorious for restricting people's ability to vote, especially in racially diverse areas. First, they gerrymander everything such that white people still have the advantage even in what would otherwise have been a more colorful district. And then they impose unnecessary requirements or restrictions, and they close polling places, forcing long lines. Again, that typically happens in more colorful areas, doesn't it? And Trump's plan, Project 2025, which he initially lied about, saying he didn't know what it is, but it was always his plan, proposes to prosecute election officials under Section 241 of Title 18 of the U.S. Code, which Congress enacted as part of the Enforcement Act of 1870. Currently, Donald Trump himself is already facing a charge under Section 241 for his attempt to overturn the 2020 election. But Project 2025's version of this would pervert civil rights laws such that they actually do the opposite of the original intention, where it would criminalize those who try to help people to vote rather than those who impede voting. It would weaken the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division, and of course, Trump is gunning for the Voting Rights Act too. The Voting Rights Act and the National Voter Registration Act work together to protect the freedom to vote. Both laws were designed to stop those who may try to suppress the vote, But Project 2025 would weaken the enforcement of both laws by stripping the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, which is responsible for enforcing the VRA and the NVRA. The 16th Amendment says Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on income. However you feel about that, billionaires don't want to pay more in taxes than you do. And Donald Trump is a billionaire, and he pays less than most of you do. He certainly pays less than I do. That's why Trump proposes ending federal income tax. He wants to replace taxes with tariffs because he still has the impression that foreign countries pay to export those rather than American consumers paying to import those goods. Somehow Trump exceeds capacity in economic incompetence. The 17th Amendment says that the Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state elected by the people thereof for 6 years, and each senator shall have 1 vote. The electors of each state will have the qualifications requisite for the electors of the most numerous branch of the state legislatures. In a Republican-only town hall led by Arizona Representative Andy Biggs, he told the crowd of conservatives that they are doing away with the 16th and 17th Amendments. Colorado's MAGA Republican Lauren Boebert chimed in on this, saying that Americans had too many rights when it came to voting, as if congressmen should be elected by legislators rather than by the people they represent. The 18th Amendment brought on the prohibition of alcohol. Trump is not going after that one. However, his Project 2025 does intend to impose a new prohibition, this time against pornography. The first problem with that, the first problem implementing that, is how do you define what is criminally pornographic and what is acceptable depictions of affection or nudity? Then the problem is the reason behind it. Emily Cow, director for the Heritage DeVos Center for Religion and Civil Society, said in a campaign press release, "It's not just entertainment and broader culture. Too many government initiatives push graphic information about sex and abortion to promote destructive ideas about gender identity." I have never seen pornography produced by a government initiative, not even during Bill Clinton's term. Nor have I seen porn movies ever talking about abortion. And accepting the reality that what you might think of as an unexpected gender identity and that those people have rights even if you think they're weird, that's not destructive. Your bigotry is destructive, even to your own children. The 19th Amendment says the right of the citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. However, John Gibbs, a 2020 election denier backed by Donald Trump in the race to represent Michigan's 3rd Congressional District, claimed women's suffrage was linked to the decline of American society. The AI overview of this topic says that while the Republican Party's official stance is not against women's suffrage, some individuals and groups within or associated with the party have expressed views that could be interpreted as opposing or undermining the 19th Amendment. The 20th Amendment, also called the Lame Duck Amendment, mostly concerns scheduling dates of presidential and congressional actions. Trump doesn't seem to oppose this one. The 21st Amendment only repeals the 18th. And Trump doesn't seem to care about that either, except that it reminds him that it might be possible for him to repeal the 14th and 16th Amendments. However, the 22nd Amendment is of interest to Trump because it holds that no person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice. But MAGA Republican Andrew Ogles of Tennessee introduced House Joint Resolution 29, which proposes that no person shall be elected to the office of president more than 3 times, with a disqualification placed on persons who had served 2 consecutive terms as president from running for a 3rd term. This would allow Trump to run again, but it is specifically phrased such that Obama could not run against him. The amendment to give Trump a 3rd term has a lot of support among MAGA Republicans. And Trump, knowing how his Project 2025 aims to strip away our right to vote, has hinted several times that there may be no more elections in his lifetime. The 23rd Amendment allows the District of Columbia to participate in the presidential election. Trump doesn't seem to care about that. The 24th Amendment prohibits the use of poll taxes or any other tax as a prerequisite for voting in federal elections. When Trump deprives you of your vote, he won't use poll taxes to do it. The 25th Amendment is designed to allow the executive and legislative branches working together to remove a president from office when it becomes evident that the president is incapable, incompetent, or insane. Democrats were already calling for the 25th Amendment to be evoked back in Trump's first term. They did it formally after the January 6th insurrection, with a Republican voting with them because Donald Trump had sufficiently demonstrated how he was both unwilling and unable to discharge the most basic fundamental powers and duties of his office. Of course, that would have left us with President Mike Pence, but he refused to evoke the 25th. If we did it now, that would leave us with President J.D. Vance. And unfortunately, the 25th Amendment only removes a president when they're incapable, not when they're evil and in league with evil. The 26th Amendment says that as long as you're over 18 years of age, your right to vote will not be denied specifically due to your age. Republicans have advocated for loosening child labor laws, lowering the age at which children can work dangerous jobs on overtime hours. They've tried to repeal truancy laws so that the kids can be in the street or at work instead of at school, because Republicans are also trying to destroy public education and every sort of welfare benefiting impoverished kids. And they refuse to ban child marriage. The so-called big, beautiful bill that MAGA Republicans are currently pushing through Congress also lowers the ages of your dependents from 18 all the way down to 7, just to cheat your kids even more, but they're not going to lower the age to vote. And when they deny people their vote, it won't be because of how old they are. The 27th Amendment says that no law varying the compensation for the services of the senators and representatives shall take effect until an election of representatives shall have intervened. That doesn't seem to present any conflict with MAGA Republicans. So Trump has specifically attacked and is still threatening every single provision of the First Amendment. He hasn't threatened the Second or the Third, but he is gunning for the Fourth and the Fifth, and those are both a big deal. He has also undermined the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th. MAGA Republicans often object to the 11th and the 12th and the 15th, and Trump is actively trying to repeal the 14th and the 16th. A few MAGA Republicans said they want to repeal the 13th, 17th, and 19th, and the 18th Amendment was already repealed. And Trump has definitely got the 22nd Amendment in his crosshairs, though he will use other means to disable that one. And he definitely doesn't like the 25th Amendment either, since he's the only president who ever faced the possibility of removal due to criminal corruption and incompetence and insurrection. He has done and is doing so much damage that it's hard to keep track. But it seems that the 2nd, 3rd, 20th, 23rd, 26th, and 27th Amendments are safe. Maybe the 13th and 19th too, but the other, 18, apparently, are all in jeopardy. I remember as a child, my mother believed in this prophecy from her church about when an antichrist would rule the country, a false prophet deceiving many. And if I were religious, then Trump sure fits that description, including how his minions would wear the mark of the beast on their foreheads. Of course, I never bought into that, not even as a young child, but I knew that other part of the prophecy would come true eventually, when, as she said, the Constitution would be hanging by a thread. That time has come. That time is now. But I can't show her that and have her understand or accept it because she voted for it. She bought into it and has been consumed by it. She doesn't know any better. The Constitution is hanging by a thread, and Donald Trump is still wielding the scissors.